Hey all, Pete here. Wanted to do a couple videos about things I learned this year trapping coyotes, kind of like lessons from the trap line. My coyote season ended. Well, we don't have a season, but like I don't usually trap coyotes past first week of January, so been done for a few weeks now. Took some fur to the sale last weekend. Did okay considering, you know, the prices are down, but did better than I thought it would, and actually did a little better on fox than I thought I would. So that's good. Real quick, I just want to show you guys this. I had this sheath made. My old sheath that I've had forever is all busted up, and so I had this sheath made for my K-bar. Dewey Dwayne, I can't remember his last name now, but he's on a lot of the forums on Facebook. Waddle, I think is his last name, Waddell. I'll try to find a link to his website and put it in the comments. But if you need anything made out of leather, holsters, sheaths, whatever, he does really good custom work. He's reasonable, and so I just want to throw that out there. I got a new sheath for my K-bar. So this year was a really rough year for me. I think I only posted one catch video. I caught more than one coyote, but it was a really rough year, and I just did not catch what I thought I was going to catch this year. And I learned some things that I wanted to share in a couple videos, and I've got a little time right now to do it. I'm going to be setting water traps for rats and mink here in a couple weeks, so I've got some downtime right now. Highlights of my year: I caught my first bobcat. I've never trapped bobcats before on purpose. And I set some bobcat traps, and within the first week of the bobcat season, I had 2 bobcats. My goal was 2. I just had a small section of this one drainage that I was going to trap for cats. I knew there were some cats running around in there. I didn't know how many. Not a lot. There wasn't a ton of sign, but I knew I could probably get 1 or 2, and I did. So I'll do a video about what I did for bobcats in a different video. But coyotes. Whew. All right, lessons learned. I trap properties for landowners. Very rarely do I come across a coyote den on these lands. And so what I know about these properties is that there are not generally resident coyotes there. So the coyotes that come through the properties that I trap, they're passing through. They're passing through. I did what I should have done. I scouted this summer. There was sign. And so I set. I did really well in the first few weeks. In fact, most of the coyotes that I caught this year were in the month of October. November, things just slowed down to almost nothing. And I thought, like, God, am I doing something wrong? Is there, you know, what's going on? So I had my mentor come out with me who's taught me how to trap, started teaching me when I was 14, and we're still friends. I'm 46. He looked at all my sets. He goes, Pete, your sets are great. He goes, I have one question. And I said, what's that? He goes, where's the sign? And I'm like, you know, you're right. I haven't seen fresh coyote sign forever. And so the only thing I can, that I'm led to assume or believe is that they just didn't have the numbers in the properties. I ended up leaving my traps in some of those spots out a little bit longer and picked up a few stragglers, but I got out of there and got onto some different properties and caught a few more. But I think the number one lesson is if you're not going to be a long liner where you're running 100 miles of traps, and you're going to trap properties in the West, you know, where I live in Idaho, you're just going to trap these little properties here and there. You're going to be hit and miss, you know, because if they're not coming through, they're not coming through. And that was just the reality for several of the places that I like that I have trapped in the past and did again this year, or that I did for the first time this year. It's just like, yeah, great sets, but there's no fresh sign. The coyotes aren't coming through. And so like my mentor, Kevin, told me, you can't catch what isn't there. You know, so lesson number one is you can do everything right, but if the land doesn't support the animal population there, you're not going to catch anything, or you're going to catch things occasionally. You know, when numbers are higher, generally, then more coyotes will be moving through those areas. But if they're down for some reason or whatever, if they're not coming through, you're not going to catch as many. You know, so that's lesson number one. Okay, so don't get discouraged when, you know, and start second guessing yourself if you're not catching anything, because if you're not seeing a lot of fresh sign, then there's nothing there. Now, if you're seeing constant sign and you're not catching anything, then there's an issue. You're doing something that you need to change. Okay, not wrong, but just you could do things better. Number two lesson that I learned, but that was reinforced for me, is to absolutely, without fail, no matter what, if at all possible, set on sign. Don't set close to sign. Don't set in the general vicinity of sign. Okay, if there is sign, set on it. That's where your set goes. I don't care how good that backing looks right over there, or, well, I think I might get some eye appeal with that. It's like, no. If that had eye appeal, then the sign would go to that eye appeal. His tracks would go to that. They're not. They're right here. So set right there. So I learned that. I know that. I practiced that this year. It mattered. But I also had to remind myself of that, because there's one property I trap that I like to snare for coyotes along the canyon. And I didn't do very well there last year. And this year when we got some snow, there just wasn't much sign on these trails. There's a little bit sometimes, but not a ton. But every time I would check my snares, then I'd walk back through the farm fields back to my vehicle. That's where I was seeing all the sign. But I always waited on this property till winter, till it was cold, so I could snare it and not have to put traps in the frozen ground. And, you know, if I paid for it this year. I didn't do well out there at all. And next year, it's like, I don't care what time of the year I get out there, traps are going in the ground where the coyotes are. And if there's coyotes on the trails, then I'll put snares on the trails. But if there's no coyote sign on the trails, I'm not going to put snares and wait for one to decide to go that way if they're mainly going in this other direction, on this other travel way. And so set on sign, you know, and if you're trapping big, you know, big rangeland and stuff like that, then that's even more important, because they could go anywhere. So if there is sign, and there aren't a lot of trails, but there is coyote sign, put a trap there. There's likely to be another coyote come by. Okay, don't just go, well, this looks good, but, you know, there's no coyote scat, there's no tracks, but this looks good. It's like, no, set on sign every time that you possibly can. Okay, lesson number two. Lesson number three, guess which set produced the most coyotes. It's the set that I've always said is my absolute favorite set, a blind trail set. That produced the most coyotes for me this year. Caught a few in dirt holes, caught a few in flat sets, but a blind trail set. So I'm talking about a trail that has coyote tracks on it, has coyote scat on it. They're already walking on that trail. Put a trap in the ground. Don't put sand around. Don't do anything. Just dig the hole, put the trap in, make it look natural, leave it alone. Your scent will wear off and a coyote will step in your trap. Okay? That is what produces the most coyotes for me. I've been after coyotes now 4 or 5 years that I've been trying to get serious about coyote trapping. And 4 years. And that's the set. I mean, that's what catches the most coyotes for me every year. Okay? And I think that's why snares are so effective too, because, I mean, obviously you don't have all the disturbance you have with putting a trap in the ground, but with a snare, it's where a coyote's already going, right? So I do the same. I try to use the same idea with leg holds. I will put a leg hold in front of a crawl under at a fence, oftentimes before I'll put a snare there, because a coyote can see a snare, and if they've had any experiences with them, they'll refuse. But you put a leg hold right where they're going to come up to start going under. And that was my first coyote of the year, I think, this year, was in a crawl under with the leg hold in the ground. Yeah. So Blind trail sets are my absolute favorite. They will always be my favorite. Use them at every opportunity. If a coyote's coming through there already, he'll come through again. Put a trap in the ground, okay? Last big lesson, well, two more. Second to the last big one is I am really not convinced. And I know that I am not an expert. I know that. I am not an expert. I bow to the longliners. But I've had longliners confirm this theory of mine. I really don't think that urine and whatever particular flavor of lure and bait you're using matters a whole bunch. Okay, I don't think one has value over another one in general. You know, I made all these baits this year that I wanted to try with all these different smells and all these different things. And by the end of the season, when I was having a hard time getting anything, and I had to go and use different bait because I was out of all the high-tech stuff I made and all the fancy lures, and I ended up having to just go get some old burger out of the freezer and mix some sardines in it and some glycerin so it wouldn't freeze. And then, you know, I was out of lures, but I had some beaver castor and I had some skunk left and I had some meat gland left. I just mixed them all together, mixed some oil, some fry grease oil, mixed them in some fry grease oil and some glycerin so it wouldn't freeze, and caught coyotes. So, I didn't have any urine left. You know, I don't think that all that stuff matters as much as the people who sell it want us to think it matters. Next year, I'm going to make one bait, you know, for coyotes, probably one bait. I might try bobcat meat. I've heard good things about it. If not, I'm going to use a different meat that I already have. I'm going to mix some beaver castor and skunk in it because those smells seem to be universally good for making critters come investigate. And I may or may not make a lure. I haven't decided. I will use gland lure. I want to say that the second part of this is that I did pretty good on gland lure sets walkthroughs where you've got gland lure on one side and some urine on the other side, and then you got a trap in the middle. I don't know if it was the urine or the lure that made the coyote come check it out, but I had to make some without urine because I was out of urine and I still caught coyotes. So I'm guessing it was the gland lure. So I will buy some gland lure, but other than that, I'm not buying lures. I'm gonna make some out of just some beaver castor and skunk. That'll work for coyotes. That'll work for cats, whatever. And I'm not real worried about it if I even use a lure. I'm going to make a strong bait, and that's what I'm going to do. And I talked with a longliner about this, and he catches about 300 a year, and he doesn't use lure or urine. So I think it's just more work than it needs to be, and more stinky shit I got to carry around with me that I don't want to carry around with me. So last thing, freeze proofing. There is nothing better than wax dirt. I'm a calcium chloride guy. I like to use calcium chloride to freeze-proof my sets. But I have to admit, after this year, that really there is nothing better than wax dirt. So, you know, if you can make wax dirt and you can drive to your sets and you don't have to carry it too far, then I'd say wax dirt's the way to go. Even with wax dirt, if it snows and gets wet and freezes on top, you will get a crust that you'll have to do something about, okay? But bottom line, wax dirt is the best antifreeze for your traps. Second to that, calcium chloride. I learned this year some stuff about calcium chloride. I've used it in the past, but this year we had some weird stuff happen. Some heavy rains and then really cold temperatures. If you're going to use calcium chloride, I'm still going to use calcium chloride, by the way, because there's places I have to hike to. But if you're going to use calcium chloride, first thing, if you're using double long spring traps, like I use, be very careful not to dig your bed too deep. Okay, so I made the mistake of digging my bed too deep for my trap, and ended up with too much dirt on the top of the jaws and too much dirt for the calcium chloride to try to deal with. Okay. So I figured that out mid-season, and I got my traps bedded shallower to where those jaws on those double longs are just right below the surface of the dirt. You know, I mean, we're talking 1/4 inch of dirt. Now, I've caught coyotes with my traps bedded a lot deeper than that, but I wasn't dealing with any kind of freezing. So first thing is make sure that you don't dig your trap beds too deep. Then you're going to want to put a good layer of calcium chloride in the bottom of the bed, or a piece of wax paper or something to stop frost from coming up. Okay. So I like to put a good layer of calcium chloride in, put the trap in, and then in the past, I haven't done a lot of layering with it because it seemed like that layer in the bottom would keep the heat rising, but it didn't this year. So I had to start layering more with my calcium chloride. All right. So you're going to want to use it in some layers. I put a thick layer at the bottom, but then not as much as I start to bed the trap. But I still mix some in with the dirt in the rest of the trap bed. And then I make sure that there's some right by where the springs touch the jaws so that won't freeze. And then I make sure that those jaws are only a 1/4 inch below that top level of dirt, period. Okay. Final lesson. Expandable pans. I used expanded pans on a bunch of my number 4 double long springs, and I used a little bit smaller electric box cover than the big square one. So there's about that much room between the pan and the jaws, but I still have a bigger pan than normal. My expanded pans did better. They did better. Okay, with my number 4s. I didn't use any on my number 3s, but they did better on my number 4s. All right. And with that, the last thing, I'll just get them all into one video. Last thing, pan tension. I've always known it matters. I've always been told it matters. This year, I'm absolutely convinced I will never set another canine trap without pan tension. Because I used some old traps without pan tension on some of my trail sets and had toe catches. And that's never happened to me before. So, you know, I mean, I had one where they stepped and then took their foot off before the trap fired. So they had pushed the pan down on one of my older traps that had some creep in the pan. I'm done. I'm done. Everything that I have that hasn't been converted to the Positrip pan system is going to get converted this spring. And I'm not going to set coyote traps that don't have pan tension anymore. So pan tension matters. I learned that for an absolute fact this year. Take it to the bank. Put tension on your pans. Okay? That's what I learned this year. It was a fun year. I'm going to do another video of the highlights where I talk about the good stuff that happened. But those are the things I learned with some of the mistakes I made. All right? Until next time, remember, God is great. Guns are good. Freedom is precious. And pray for your neighbor and pray for our country. See ya.